Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening. I've got a script, so I'm going to get started. It's going to be a night. To walk, stand, sit, or lie on any land is to be on a landscape layered with histories, memories, possibilities, realized and denied, and stories that demand to be acknowledged and told. Whether you're here in the halls of this room or watching on land elsewhere, you are on land, whose histories and stewardship and accompanying injustices need to be acknowledged. And proper recognition is merely a first step. The place of this lecture, the Harvard Graduate School of Design, is located on the traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what we now know as Boston and Cambridge. We pay respect to the people, past, present, and future of the Massachusetts tribe, for whom the land remains sacred, and which we honor, recognizing that this demands that we ask what are our obligations to this land, and the many people who have been its stewards and occupants. And we invite you, wherever you view this, to reflect on how foregrounding the stories and perspectives of Indigenous inhabitants on the present, past, and future of where you are shifts your understanding of and obligations to the land and the people around you. Welcome again and good evening. Here's some friendly announcements before we get into our program. First, I guess I should tell you who I am. I am Professor Toni Griffin. I'm a professor of practice here at the Graduate School of Design in the Department of Urban Design and Planning. I am also the director of the Just City Lab and one of the curators of the Just City Mayoral Fellowship. And I'm also the founder of Urban American City. That's a lot. I wear a lot of hats. Welcome. A quick reminder that we are live captioning, and it's available tonight for our virtual and in-person audience. Those joining virtually can enable captions by clicking the closed caption icon at the bottom of the live stream window. And for our in-person audience, live captioning is available through the QR code currently on the screen. Thank you, Matt. Please visit Matt in the AV booth up top if you have or need any assistance. Also want to share with you some other events that are going to be happening at the GSD in the very near future. Next Thursday, February 13th, here at the GSD, we'll host the lecture by the 2025 Kenzo Tange design critic and architecture, Dorte Mandrup, who will speak about conditions of place and form. Then on Thursday, the 20th of February, the GSD will be hosting a screening of the documentary Sitting Still, a portrait of the landscape architect Laurie Olin and his social vision. And then finally, towards the end of March, on the 25th to be specific, in the Carl M. Sapers Ethics in Practice lecture, Maurice Cox and former Mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, will discuss the goals, engagement processes, and still evolving outcomes from the Invest Southwest program. Now, while we're here, I am really pleased to introduce our fifth installation of Mayors Imagining the Just City. This public program series is a part of a program called the Mayor's Institute on City Design, Just City Mayoral Fellowship. This is a program that was launched right in the middle of COVID during the summer of 2020. It is a partnership between the Just City Lab and the GSD, the Mayor's Institute on City Design, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayor's Institute on City Design is a 50-plus year institution that understands that mayors are the chief designers of their cities, and with that moniker, it was very important for them to understand the language and the excellence of the work that we bring to city building. So what better advocate is to shape mayors, leaders of cities around the work we do as we partner with them to build better cities. So we were really delighted to partner with them to offer a very unique course for these mayors where they spend the spring semester alongside of many of you in this room in an online course that is educating them not only about design and design excellence across all the disciplines here at the GSD, but very specifically around what it means to address issues of social and spatial injustice, and to infuse in their work better strategies, policies, and processes around how to create more just cities. As I say, we're in our 5th year. This incoming class will top us off at, by the end of the semester, at 39 alumni who have been at the program so far, and we're very excited to continue to evolve and expand this program, not just for the mayors, but as an institution within the GSD that enables opportunities for you as students as well as faculty to engage with these amazing leaders. I like to put on the spot our incoming class and introduce them to you before I say a bit more about the panel we're going to hear from tonight. So our 8 mayors that are joining us this year, and you may rise if you would, as I call you, Mayor Carrie Thompson from Bloomington, Indiana, Mayor Becky Daggett from Flagstaff, Arizona, Mayor Harvey Ward for Gainesville, Florida, Mayor Scott Conger from Jackson, Tennessee, Mayor Stephen Reed from Montgomery, Alabama, Mayor Shannon E. Glover from Portsmouth, Virginia, Mayor Helen Tran from San Bernardino, California, and Mayor Elmer Hernandez from Suisun City, California. Can we give them all just a round of applause? These mayors apply to be a part of this program. It is a competitive process, and the other reason we really should applaud them is because they're choosing to lean into addressing issues that a lot of us are very concerned about within this school. So to be an elected official and to lean into this work in this moment is quite significant, and so I think they deserve one more round of applause. Thank you. So each year we pick a theme that we think is resonating with what these mayors are grappling with every day, because it's no small feat for them to leave their city for 2 days and come be here as a part of their orientation, or show up every week for a 90-minute course. And there is homework, there are readings they have to do. It's a very serious endeavor. And so this year, we chose the theme of housing our communities. So it is going to be very much about the many issues of housing, but we're going to get underneath who are we housing for. And housing sits in a context of a neighborhood, of a city that has a whole other set of socioeconomic, political dynamics. So they're going to be interrogating this issue, learning about this issue from faculty here at the GSD, practitioners from around the country, to help them figure out better solutions to dealing with the issues that they grapple with every day. We use the public program as a way to bring some of that conversation to our larger community here within the GSD, within Cambridge, and those that are listening from around the world. So I'm super excited that this year we are bringing alumni mayors from our program. So I'd like to introduce our panel and our moderator, and we are always excited to collaborate here locally. So we have not an alumni mayor here yet, but we have hopefully a future mayor who will be joining us represented by her amazing chief of staff. So let me first introduce our panelists, and once I do, invite them to get our program started. So one of our alumni from the class of 2021 is Jake Day. Jake Day was formerly the mayor of Salisbury, Maryland. He is now the Secretary of Housing and Community Development for the state of Maryland under Governor Wes Moore. As a member of the Governor's Executive Council, Secretary Day is the Governor's Senior Advisor on Housing and Place-Based Economic Development. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of the state's Housing Finance Agency, managing $2.5 billion in annual spending. I'm going to shorten some of these bios because I want to get to the conversation. We are also joined by alumni, Mayoral Fellowship alumnus, Mayor D.C. Reeves, who's the class of 2022. Mayor Reeves has been the mayor of Pensacola, Florida since November 2022. So when he started the program, he was like a couple of weeks into the job. He was fresh into the role. His focus has been on on public safety, economic development, and maintenance of city assets. Previously, Reeves was a sports journalist, author, and community builder and entrepreneur. He also served as the CEO of the Spring Entrepreneur Hub, advocating for small businesses in Pensacola. So I always find it really interesting, the backgrounds of mayors and like why they choose to do this job. By the way, I think this is the best elected official job anyone could ever have, and I think our moderator is going to help us unpack that a little bit. Both Mayor Reeves, and I still call him Mayor Jake, are going to talk about projects or initiatives that they actually workshopped a little bit through their experience in the fellowship. So I'm really excited for them to be here and talk about the evolution of their work and what this program has meant to them. And then, as many of you know, Mayor Michelle Wu just had a lovely new baby, so we're super excited to be joined by Tiffany Chu, who is Mayor Wu's Chief of Staff. Tiffany comes from a background in design and urban planning and entrepreneurship. Prior to joining the City of Boston, she was the CEO and co-founder of Remix, a collaborative software platform for transportation planning used by over 500 cities around the world. And we're going to ask Tiffany to kind of talk about the topic on the table by bringing in some of the work that she and the mayor have been doing here locally in Boston. And then finally, I'm super excited to be joined by my fellow Loeb Fellow, Katie Swenson, who will be moderating this conversation for us this evening, a nationally recognized design leader, researcher, and writer, and educator. Katie has served as, or is serving as, the senior principal of Mass Design Group since 2020. Katie has over 20 years of experience in the theoretical and practical application of design thinking and is a talented global public speaker and thought leader. My team, is there anything I've missed in my notes that I have not said? That sounds good. Okay, great. Let me finally, before I forget, thank not only my amazing partners, the Mayor's Institute on City Design, but my awesome, amazing research assistant team of students here from the GSD, Molly Brodsky, Ben Perla, Imani Day, and Shaluva. I will not mess up your last name, so I won't even try it. But this program is staffed by an amazing group of students who support this work. In April, there will be other opportunities for students to meet the mayor, so stay tuned and connected to us along the semester. So with that, and over 2 minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Katie and the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, let's get started. Well, thank you so much, Toni, for kicking us off, and special thanks to the entire Just City crew and the MICD crew. We're so glad to be here. I think, there are two main reasons. I got to meet the new class of fellows, so part of tonight is introducing them to this world and getting a taste of what they're in store for, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I also think the other part of tonight is that we're all here because we're looking for bright spots in public leadership. And if you're at the GSD, you believe that design has an important part to play in a leadership agenda. Design is all about envisioning a better future than what we see today. So I think I can speak for everyone here that we're incredibly grateful to see you all standing up and taking this bold act of public leadership, and we really thank you. So we'll start there, but let's just start and say, okay, we're here, you guys are here. Welcome to the Just City Fellowship. You all were a part of the Just City Fellowship in some way, and I wonder if Secretary Day and Mayor Reeves, you were members of the cohort. What led you to be a part of this program? What made you apply, and what inspired you to join in the first place?
Sure, I'll start. Well, good evening, everyone. Jake Day, Secretary of Housing for Maryland. Look, there are a number of answers I could give to this, but I want to be clear that I started off as a design student. Architecture, undergraduate, urban design was my first master's degree. And so I've got a love for and appreciation of this work and what design can do, both in terms of influencing public policy, as well as shaping our communities and shaping the way we do work, frankly. So for me, it started with that inherent love, but also exposure through the Mayor's Institute on City Design to this approach to a class, a cohort of mayors and public leaders interacting with design professionals, policy professionals, transportation professionals, economic development professionals. And that was really, really powerful. So I did 2 MICD cohorts. And then, when this opportunity arose, also Trinity Simons is a friend of mine. When this opportunity arose, I had to say it, I jumped at the chance. And really, it was also an opportunity to tie this work to the most meaningful thing that our society is facing, is how do we repair damage done in this country through the lens of race.
And yeah, look, I'll say, as Toni pointed out, I'd been in the job a few hours before I started this, but it's part of the journalistic background of, when you don't know something, you go try to figure out the best way to do it. And I know we'll talk details a little bit later, but certainly I have good feelings when I walk in this building, because when I walked out of it, the difference between spring of 2023 and 2 years later is about $37 million of funding for a transformational project and about $75 million of funding in our 4 most vulnerable census tracts in the city of Pensacola. And by our math, we're not sure that amount of money has been invested in those places ever, combined. So what we learned here is not only the project we'll talk about, but also the compounding impact of saying, well, man, this is meaningful, and really introducing an entire community on what community engagement does look like. That was new for me and new for us. So, I really feel like the job of mayors is to know what you know, and just as valuable, know what you don't know. And whether that means somebody on your team, whether that means bringing on an expert to make sure that you're making good decisions. And so that, I would say, my inspiration of being here is understanding what we didn't know well as a community and as a new mayor. And I'm so grateful, and I know our city's so grateful for that result.
Beautiful. Tiffany, you didn't have direct experience as some of these folks, but you've had engagements with the Just City program and with the Mayor's Institute on City Design. What's been your experience, and what do you see as some of the prime values?
Thanks so much, Katie, and for having me, everybody. I would say we had the honor of hosting the Mayor's Institute of City Design just a couple years ago, and Mayor Wu, when she heard from Trinity that a whole cohort of mayors were about to arrive in Boston, we actually thought deeply about what would be the best way to showcase not only to the mayors, but to the city as a whole, the importance of urban design to mayors. I think that connection, urban design and mayors, is not always a deep connection that people think of when they think of politics. And so what our mayor wanted to do was take Mayor Reeves and a bunch of other mayors on a blue bike tour of Boston together, and in an enormous cohort, showing off some of our new protected bike lanes in the West End, connecting to City Hall, and ending up at the Museum of Science. Oh, Mayor Tran was also part of that. And I just remember distinctly sitting behind Mayor Duggan of Detroit on a blue bike, and he hadn't fixed his seat well enough, and he was toddling a little bit, and I was like, oh my God, are we gonna have a crash? Are we gonna have like a public health situation? And I think it was just, he was fine, he did great. It was just the power of having all those mayors have kind of a similar experience together, but also be able to show off Boston. That was something that was really meaningful to Mayor Wu and everyone involved. Beautiful.
So, you all come and you get this deep dive into this incredible curriculum. Each one of those lectures is a decade's worth of experience. And you learn the Just City framework and try to put together this larger vision. Meanwhile, thinking about how to apply it at home. So how were you able to apply the lessons that you learned here and take them back to your community? Can you give us some sort of tangible effects.
Yeah, there was a good conversation with the mayors earlier this evening about you're always balancing as a mayor. We're 55,000 in about a 350,000 person county, smaller city. So you're always balancing bandwidth with impact, right? Is it those decisions that you make, again, whether you have somebody else come in and try to help you from the outside, you may not always have all the FTEs that you need. So, I feel like we've been successful in our city just trying to really hone in on what those one or two or maybe three things are, not try to be everything to everybody, but really cling on to what our greatest needs are and try to find those one or two solutions of how to attack them. So I would say that's really what resonated with us. Actually, I know someone's here from the Lincoln Institute. I'll give an anecdote. One of the first meetings we went to was with the Lincoln Institute, and they showed this map of who owns property in Baltimore, and how long, whether it's vacation rentals and how long they've owned, and then the corresponding impact on code enforcement violations, as it pertains to whether somebody who lives in the city owns it or someone else. So I remember walking out at a break and I call our code enforcement person. I'm like, we've got to change something like right now. Like that's the life of a mayor, I would like to tell you that we have 15 meetings about things and we work through every scenario. When you're a mayor, it's bandwidth versus impact, and you try to find those different things that you can do within reason that can have the greatest impact on your community. So again, the project we'll talk about is one of those, and even some of those examples throughout were prompted kind of catalytic conversations that had nothing to do with the project at hand and just how we can be a better city.
Well, look, I've got a couple things to add, but first of all, I want to acknowledge that I come all the way to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we're still talking about code enforcement in Baltimore. So, my job follows me, I guess.
That's right.
Thanks, Mayor. So two things I want to point out. Number one, we just left a room, and the mayor was talking about the conversation happening with the current cohort. And sitting at the table is, if I were going to assemble a group of advisors on housing policy in America, it would be that table. That's the beauty of this type of engagement. Not only do we have, trailblazing mayors, but you get to sit at the table with America's best thinkers on housing policy. So that's a wonderful gift, and I got that gift a few years ago. The other is that I sought the job of housing secretary. I asked for this. I never asked to be a housing mayor. But what I found was there was nothing else that affected all of my residents' lives more than the place where they laid their head at night. And it affected those who had nowhere to lay their head other than the sidewalk. It affected those who we would have traditionally thought of as pretty well off. Increasingly, middle class families and families making an income that we would think of as enough to survive, that they're experiencing turbulence in their housing situation, whether it's a predatory rental situation or whether it's rising housing costs and the inability to move a growing family into a house that can accommodate their needs. So I was put into a position where, as I was going through the Just City Mayor's Fellowship, where I had to focus intensively on housing. And again, I think that's probably an experience of local officials around the country. So that begat a process of really thinking about the work that I did at a city scale into what I could do at a statewide scale. And so from day one, we ended up focusing on racial justice in housing and in place as really a core function of what we were tasked with as a state housing agency, which was a big departure from state housing agencies, which spend their days talking about capital markets and what kind of bond instrument you're going to deploy in order to increase home ownership in your state. But all these things ultimately have to be connected back to America's past injustices if you're going to really move the needle for everybody, and if you're going to move the needle collectively as a city, as a state, as a nation.
Tiffany, I wonder how you see sort of adopting a Just Cities framework here in Boston.
We talk a lot about the way that we engage our communities is the vehicle in which people start to feel like they finally belong in Boston. And to connect that to design a little bit more concretely, there have been two major projects we've kind of embarked upon in the last 3 years we've been in office. One of them is our Squares and Streets initiative, which is basically trying to rezone the whole city of Boston. I think some of the images will appear here. For those of you who aren't familiar, Boston zoning code is 4,000 pages long. Whenever we want to amend something, we don't amend it, we just add an amendment, so it makes it longer and longer and longer. And something like 97% of projects built in Boston require a variance, so actually not even complying with current code. So when you tell residents, oh, I'm going to rezone the city, that scares them. So the way that we have tried to take it step by step, one bite of the elephant at a time, is to focus on places that could really use and celebrate density in a way that's almost non-arguable. If you have a small business district that's, got some vacant retail fronts and, could use an infusion of investment and upzone so that those businesses, that coffee shop could benefit from more residents patronizing their business. We've started with Squares and Streets high priority or high transit capacity corridors that already see some elements of walkability to kind of build upon our strengths, even though they might not be, 100% there yet. And we also find that those are the same communities that are often disadvantaged with, vacant storefronts in Boston. So kind of putting all those pieces together alongside our second big project, which has been our design vision. It may appear here, but translating some of the concerns from our residents who have felt that there were new neighborhoods in the city with, very glossy, shiny buildings and very tall skyscrapers that did not maybe feel as welcoming, and how to translate what we build in the future into a design vocabulary that embraces the heterogeneity of Boston's neighborhoods.
Let's go to some of the images. You all have shared a few with us, and I think I'd love to ask you to introduce the projects, and then maybe how did they happen because of, or how did they happen differently because of your experience here at the Just City Fellowship? You want to start?
Sure. I'll let you know when ours comes up. But anyway, yeah. Again, was mayor, grew up in Pensacola, and in 2004 we had our worst hurricane. It's the year before Katrina, so Hurricane Ivan, 140 mile an hour direct hit, and it changed a lot of things. The saying was, people who were just visiting after wondered why everybody had a pool in Florida, and it was the roof tarps coming in from the airport. Everybody had a blue roof tarp for about a year or more. And so what came with that was the understanding, really the beginning of talking about coastal resiliency, being on the Gulf. Our sea level rises twice as fast as most in the United States. And so in 2004, we said we have this interstate that 1.3 miles, 18 city blocks. There you go. And so here's just an early rendering. By the way, to skip to the end, we started design kickoff in November. So these are very early conceptual designs with MVVA. But so in 2004, we said as a community, we've got to do something from a stormwater standpoint. And so for 20 years, the most funding that we had gotten is about $1.6 million the county got from BP oil spill money from 2011, 2012. And it was kind of a little bit of, I guess I could say now, kind of an unspirited conceptual rendering. It was kind of like, what did we feel like, let's put an amphitheater here and some bathrooms here and, do something good in this dissected community that in 1972 not only cut through 18 city blocks, but the entire black-owned commercial corridor, the dairy plant, the restaurants, all of that went away and has never come back to this point. So discussed for 20 years. And when I started here, we were looking at that, and coastal resiliency across our city is an issue. This is our most vulnerable stormwater area. And so we said, well, we should take a crack at taking a look at this project and see if we can bring something to life, and that we've just been talking about it too long. What I really believe and why I say I have good feelings walking in here is I think when you do try to know what you don't know and you do as much research and you understand when you go to Tallahassee and say we're invested in this and we understand it and we've looked at it from every angle and this is important to our city is a little bit better of an application than can we have some money? And so I think, it resonates through the pages of your application when you feel like this is something that can change your community. So a couple cool things happened. One, we were able to get $36 million for the stormwater elements of the park. Obviously we can still do paths and trees and the expansion of, again, it'll be the largest stormwater investment in the history, single stormwater investment in the history of the city. And then we just found out last week we got a $5 million raise grant to be able to put on other amenities. So we're up to $41 million now on just this park. But the other cool thing that happened with our project that was new for our city, has never happened before, and part of what we learned here was having an equitable development framework plan and saying to ourselves, and something that I didn't think about coming in as mayor, and I know our community, because of their reaction to us asking these questions, didn't know, which is, it's great to have this park to try to reconnect an old community, but does it truly reconnect the community by just having the park itself? And I think there's different examples that kind of the version 1.0, it feels like, over the last 10, 15 years of righting these wrongs in these injustices, where it was saying, hey, we came in, we built this park, we built this amenity, this is great. The 2.0 kind of feels like, should we be asking about community wealth building? What is the opportunity to help leverage this? What is the city doing to preserve as best it can? It can't stop anything and everything from happening, but how can we be intentional about making sure that what's left here isn't just the park itself, but it's also truly meeting the definition of reconnecting the community? And so we did that with UDA. Was good timing. We were doing our CRA updates and had them come in. So now our design team.
Acronyms.
Urban design. Yeah. Yeah, UDA for that firm came in and they were already doing
Urban
CRA
Design
updates.
Associates from Pittsburgh. Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't a designer, so I just use acronyms to make it seem like I know more about it.
And CRA is
Community Redevelopment Agency, which is special taxing areas that allow where we do work. But bottom line is, we now 20 years after we said we need to fix stormwater, we went under design, and that design team was equipped with comments from 400 neighbors that all said this is what we want to see for our community. So that would have never happened in this city without and being involved in this project.
Secretary Day, I think you really leveraged the framework. Tell us a little bit.
Sure. Well, I'll maybe start at the city level, if that's okay, at the city scale. We had a project that was oriented on a neighborhood where the combined construction of 2 highways and some surface parking lots erased neighborhoods. So there's a neighborhood called Georgetown. It no longer exists. There's no building. There's one building that arguably is on the edge of Georgetown, but most of Georgetown is gone. Georgetown was a home ownership community. It was a black neighborhood owned. And all of that was erased through eminent domain to create highways in late 1930s, 1950s, and then the acquisition of the remaining properties and assemblage into a city surface parking lot in the 1970s. And that's an American story, right? This has happened in virtually every community. So we worked on designing some reparative structures and community structures through there, and adopting some policies that might address some of that damage. The word of caution I would offer, not everything has been implemented so far, and I'm not there anymore. So the word of caution, and I think every mayor has in their heart a sense of urgency, that nobody has quite the same sense of urgency, but work fast. Work fast. Don't accept delays. Push through your staff, push your councils, push your population on these things that are so important that you're embarking on while you're here. Don't ever let go. Because now I'm having to use the tools that I have at my disposal as Secretary of Housing and leveraging with money to get the community to do the things that maybe certain elected officials don't want to do. Because that was the last guy's idea, right? So push really hard in the years ahead. So then Governor Westmore came calling, and Governor Moore's story is known worldwide. The Other Westmore is his first book, if you haven't read it. So an incredible story. And again, an American story, really. But Governor Moore's mantra is leave no one behind. And that is in the DNA of everything that we do as a state government. And so when he asked me to be his housing secretary, I left the best job ever imaginable, being a mayor of your hometown. And I said yes for the work that I could do statewide. And one of the things that we recognize is, I had just gone through the City Mayoral Fellowship and learned a lot about not only the injustices visited upon and by the way, and on and by my city, but also visited upon my state and communities all over my state, and the African-American residents of my state, some of whom had passed, of course, right? Generations of damage, redlining, urban renewal, urban highway construction, all these things. Some of them, with the intention to repair past damage, had visited new harms, right? And so we asked ourselves, what can we do as a state? We're not at that ground level doing, that great work at the ground level any longer. But what can we do to be partners? What we recognize is that we have the power of influence through the distribution of capital. Again, you heard Toni Griffin in the introduction mention $2.5 billion a year. My agency alone puts into communities in our state. So we proposed the Just Communities Act. The Just Communities Act was a bill that we wanted to become state law. That bill empowered the governor. First of all, it would direct the Secretary of Housing to adopt a geographic layer, a mapping layer, that would look at redlining, at urban highway construction, urban renewal, any program that had done explicit harm through the lens of race. So that had unjustly and disproportionately affected Black and brown communities in our state. On top of that, it looked at current conditions to see where those harms had conditions that were anchored in the landscape today, whether that's prison population, whether that's environmental harm, whether that's other public health factors that could be measured and looked at through a geographic lens, and would create a layer through which every single state funding program could be prioritized into those places where injustices had been visited. And the aspirational term for those places would be just communities. So we asked for the General Assembly to consider that. They overwhelmingly passed it. The governor signed it into law. It is now the law of the land in Maryland. We also created a division of just communities at a state level, and an assistant secretary of just communities, Cadogan, who's done really transformational work in Oregon, that we stole her to Maryland to lead this work. So we now have an assistant secretary of just communities. You can see where we got this term from. A division of just communities, a just community law, and we are currently adopting that geographic lens through which our dollars will be directed to do reparative work that doesn't displace, that invests in communities and in the very families and households that have experienced generational harm because of those decisions of government, either explicitly or implicitly in the past. So really, it's an offshoot of, and fully because of, the Just City Mayoral Fellowship and what we learned through that experience in our communities in Maryland.
Okay, poster child. Tiffany, Massachusetts and the city of Boston lead the country in so many ways, but yet there's more work to do. So I wonder if you want to speak about some of the efforts that you all are doing to create a more just city framework.
Yeah, so obviously housing was probably the first big Oh, beautiful. Okay, so you can see our design vision up on the screen here. Very proud. I will say one of our most intractable, but also yet most top of mind issues here in Massachusetts and Boston is obviously housing, both housing production and also anti-displacement simultaneously. And maybe I'll just share kind of the lens of all of that in the encapsulation of one project that we are working on at the city. So when Mayor Wu came into office, one of the things that we were challenged to do was how can we take a bunch of city-owned land. We did an inventory. An inventory had never been done of all the city-owned land across Boston, and we landed on 150 parcels. And we wanted to show that government could lead the way in modeling the behavior we wanted to see in the private sector. So we released this inventory of 150 parcels, and we basically told the development community, if we put out all of these 150 parcels to you all, and if you build affordable housing on top of it, we will give you that land for free. We announced it at our first State of the City in 2022. People were shocked. For free? Does anything come for free? And to us, it was basically showing and modeling how important housing and housing production was for our city. So as that project has kind of barreled on and barreled forward, we had to figure out how to cut a lot of city bureaucracy. And at the same time, we were trying to figure out how we can make our current city projects also encapsulate the same vision for increasing housing. So one of the images that you'll see up here on the screen, oh, great, okay. It is our Chinatown Library, and this is what we call kind of our first in our series of projects around building housing on top of public assets. So in Chinatown, for those of you who aren't familiar, we are probably the smallest, tightest knit, and highest at risk for gentrification neighborhood in Boston, also sitting kind of in the middle of many different highways cutting across it. And the community is always fighting for more housing while also preserving the history and the typology of their row houses, and at the same time being encroached on all sides by the financial district, by the seaport, et cetera. So a lot of discussion around gentrification. One thing that we felt that we could do in our power as a city was to actually just build housing on top of a library, which we were already in the process of planning for the community. The community really wanted a new library, and the city wanted housing, so we kind of put those two visions together and made all of these different city departments talk to each other for the first time, which was a challenge in itself. I can talk more about that. And so this model of building housing on top of city assets has become kind of the rallying cry for Mayor Wu. What can we do to show what's possible? And of course, so many people said, no, that's not possible. It's too hard. It's too complex. And we started doing it. And not to say that there are no obstacles. I was just on an obstacle-filled call about this project yesterday. But we're doing this in the West End. We want to do this in Upham's Corner. We want this to be the way that the city thinks about ourselves as, you know, a development team going forward, and how we can do public-private partnership in the right way.
I want to give a shout out to my mass design team who's here, many of them in the third row, because we're so pleased to be able to work on the West End Library project. So it's been so exciting to be a part of that. And it leads me, I guess, to my next question, which is, what have you learned about working with designers? I opened the night saying that, you know, like a mayoral position, design is ideally an act of leadership. It's around helping communities come together around a future vision. So what did you learn by your exposure and your understanding and meeting these top-notch designers about how to work well with designers to kind of fuel your leadership efforts?
Well, I'm biased because I went to design school, but I'll just say that you know, both as a mayor, one of the things that we recognized was engaging with not only design professionals in our community, but also university-based design, partnerships with the University of Maryland, Morgan State University, Hampton University. That assisted us in generating ideas. Certainly it was a cost-effective way to address schematic, early stage design processes. And it was also a laboratory for the design partners, for the university. So that was one way. Since then, we now fund a variety of studios. The State of Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development funds studios and in architecture and planning programs. And the reason we do that is because that design thinking doesn't just apply itself to the project scale, right? That design thinking applies itself to the policy testing scale. And so when we want to test a policy, whether it's coming up with a pre-approved design product that might work to expedite housing production in Baltimore, or how to address vacant lots at scale in a city the size of Baltimore with vacant land at that scale, or how to do great placemaking in small towns all over our landscape. That, yes, has a site-specific problem, but there is also this policy problem that design thinking lends itself to in a way that we might not think of. We often turn to the lawyers, right? We often turn to the legislators, the policymakers, but nothing against them. I think design thinking lends itself to really pushing boundaries and to testing. It's iterative, right? It's innovative. The people who gravitate to it are innovators, and so we've benefited from that. So I think that's one of the key takeaways that I have as a policymaker who has engaged with the design community.
Great. Yeah, Tiffany, you have a very rich design community here in Boston. How do you leverage it, and what would you like more of?
Well, I will say when I first entered city government and, Boston City Hall, very imposing, brutalist, concrete structure, I think the word design was not, something that felt it was embodied, within the mayor's office or, within just like the way we did things as a culture. And one thing that I'm really proud of and get to partner with the mayor in doing is elevating the value of design within our administration, from creating a new leadership role. Our first ever deputy chief of urban design, Diana Fernandez, and I see my colleague Sam Valentine, landscape architect, sitting in the audience, and building out those design teams while also bringing in the language of talking about user research and iteration, and using even the term design can be a solution for things that previously seemed impossible to solve, whether it was like a disagreement between a resident and a developer. But then if you show them a couple of different iterations of massing, they're like, oh, well, maybe that could work and that could work. And I think there's just a visual language that designers are so good at that City Hall traditionally is not good at. I'll give you another example. I think I was so proud of this. I created the first org chart at City Hall because we didn't have one for, I think 5 or 6 years before me. And even the visual understanding of what an organization should look like and that operational transparency was, I think, something that was very design-led. So I think there's all these different corners that design can play a much bigger role in city government.
I'm laughing because I think of the things that I was shocked to find out whenever I started the job, but mine would be we didn't have an entire list of like all the things we owned. I don't know. I thought that would be like on my desk when I started. So a few months later, I got lucky, and I do not come from a design background, from a development background. My dad was involved in development for years and years, but I got lucky because I was a chief of staff for our largest community philanthropist investor before I started this job, and he got so tired of politicians not going and learning how to do other things that what he said was, I'll just pay speakers to come to Pensacola so they have no excuse. So as his chief of staff, my job was like these hardworking guys are, is making sure the microphones work, and I'm sitting in the back of this room and I'm listening to Ed McMahon from Urban Land Institute and Gina Worth from Scape, and so I got this little like accidental unofficial degree over a couple years of time of just getting and going and having lunch or dinner with them one-on-one, and never thinking I was running for mayor. This was not like any kind of plan. So I got lucky in that sense of just not becoming a designer, of course, but understanding what you guys just talked about, understanding the value of design and saying, hey, any way someone would want to criticize, we deal, I can tell you, at the small city level, our addiction to parking lots remains. Going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, even though it'll only slow speed down by 0.4 seconds over a mile, is a huge barrier. So we're still battling that with our citizens, but. Coming into this job, not as a design professional, but I was fortunate to come into it with the idea of understanding that when you unpack it, the value that it could provide for a city.
So a mayor, by definition, is like one of a kind in their city. Obviously, they have these robust teams. But part of this experience is also about coming together in a cohort. And Toni started us off by saying that there are now 39 mayors who've been through the Just City program, and hundreds, maybe thousands, Trinity, of mayors who've been through MICD. I wonder what you'd say either about the experience of being in this cohort, or what's happening that these mayors are working locally, as is so needed and such an opportunity right now, but kind of doing it in collusion, let's say, with each other.
Well, I think, anytime you're exposed to people from another place who are in similar circumstances, you have the opportunity to steal great ideas from them and credit them, of course. But you have this great opportunity. I just spent a couple days in New York with other executive directors of housing finance agencies or secretaries of their departments of housing and community development in other states, and I walked out of there with pockets full of notes, of all the things that I was going to do that they were doing, and the same is true in any setting, right? The same is true for mayors. In the closing days. The closing year or 18 months of my time as a local elected official, one of the things that I realized, again, was that we had I think what we could describe as a housing crisis. And America's in a housing crisis because we stopped producing housing in any relationship to the actual demand and need we have as a country. And so what I saw in that moment was we needed to address it. I also saw that there were political challenges to addressing it in the ways that the experts say we needed to. So it benefited me to start looking around the room at my cohort in the Just City Mayoral Fellowship, and to look around the country and say, what can I steal that resonated with those populations, with the people in Pensacola or the people in Boston. Maybe that would resonate. And also, policy balance. Like, are there tools that I can deploy where it can deliver one broad message, but touch on different facets of the policy problem we were facing? We came up with a program called Here is Home. Here is Home had multiple facets. It addressed homelessness with permanent supportive housing, and there's some pictures of a tiny home village that we built in our city, which you could look at as a novelty, but it also is a true transitional housing shelter to help transition people into our permanent supportive housing program with the city created and city funded voucher that we established, which no one could see, right? No, people couldn't see that. So you talk about permanent supportive housing and people would shrug, and they didn't care that we had created a voucher. They cared very much when we created a bright colored tiny home village in our city, and it was an indicator, right? And we'd seen that done in Austin. We'd seen it done in Los Angeles. We also created affordable housing incentives, some visible, some less. We created a supply incentive, a massive supply incentive. And imagine if we had only done one of those things. If we'd only done one of those things, potentially the supply incentive, where we created a holiday, a short-term window to create a sense of urgency in the marketplace, a holiday of permit fees, 100% of permit fees waived. We would have been accused as being in the developers' pockets, right? And that's all we had done. Now, we knew we had to. We had to do that, or else we wouldn't get a response from the market. But we had to think more broadly, and that's where the things I learned from peers in Madison, in Duluth, in all over the country, in Richmond, the peer mayors in my cohort or my class, that's where learning from them and stealing from them came really in handy.
Well, just on the housing subject, we were talking about this before we started. If I could wave a magic wand in housing in this country, and I say homelessness and housing, there's not a mayor. If you have a mayor that has figured that out, have them call in any other mayor that they know, because we have not found mission accomplished on either of those issues. It might be different severities and different unique aspects to it. But if I could wave a magic wand in the housing crisis that we're in as a country, and maybe it comes from an old journalist messaging guy, but if we could somehow have uniformity in how we speak about housing, because the biggest misperception we have in this country is, well, that housing isn't for me, so it's not good. Hey, you're in the developer's pockets. Hey, I don't want homeless transitional in my neighborhood. Because we're taking it bit by bit and we're fighting this big machine of the word affordable and what that means to that person and all that. So what I would say, we collectively, leadership, designers perhaps, we're losing the battle of messaging while we're trying to do the right thing, which really ultimately I believe is supply at all levels. And no, it shouldn't be concentrated on just one or the other, but we understand the organic growth of affordable units that happens with market rate development, as well as the needs that we would have across whatever demographic that you're in as a city. So I don't know that I'll ever see that as mayor happen, but if I had a rub of a genie lamp, that's what it would be, is us, the same way we understand red, yellow, and green, that we would understand when we talked about affordable housing, attainable housing in this country, that we talked about it with some level of uniformity.
Well, I'm heartened to hear that you guys are going to solve that this semester, right? This is the cohort that's taking on...
You can try it in Pensacola, just send it down.
Yeah, the cohort that's taking on homemaking, as I like to say. Let's go to questions from the audience. And I love the hands right up. We have some mics that are going to come over to the side. So I think if you could bring a mic down, this gentleman has a question. And if you could introduce yourself before you start your question. And ideally, yeah, scoot on over to the side if you don't mind. That would be great. Thank you so much.
Excuse me.
Okay, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Derek Evans, and I am Mayor Reeves's neighbor over in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Oh, nice.
You may have heard of my community in Gulfport, the Turkey Creek community, which is a freedmen's settlement from 1866 and was hammered by Hurricane Katrina. And before that, years of unwanted annexation by Gulfport, but had been resilient because of cultural continuities. I'm a sixth-generation descendant from 4 former slaves in Mississippi. The start of this place. And in 2003, I left Boston I came here to go to school, fell in love with Boston, particularly Roxbury, within its red-lined, historic, disinvested district area, which had coincidentally been redlined along with nearly half of Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace. You may have heard of the crown jewel, Franklin Park. So I fell in love with Roxbury, became a public school teacher, taught here, taught at BC in the early 90s. And in 2003, I went home because the graves of my ancestors were redeveloped for housing in a wetland, newly annexed by the city. Then came Hurricane Katrina. And because of those things, myself, someone you may know from Pensacola, Toni McCrae, okay? Shana Griffin, a current Loeb Fellow from New Orleans, were among a group of community-based people across 5 coastal states and the cities and the bayous and the parishes, who actually wrote the first draft, community people, of what would become the Restore Act, when actually a lot of our congressional delegation didn't want to support it because it was about amending the Clean Water Act, which they don't believe in, or they didn't at the time. So now I'm back in Boston, and I have never seen, I hate to drizzle on a parade, but I have never seen acre for acre, dollar for dollar, family for family, a more rapid displacement of intergenerational black and brown people from Boston than I'm seeing in this current administration. I wouldn't even be here in Boston or here if I didn't in 2021 or 2 have to sue the city of Boston for, I guess in which you might say a quantitative instead of a qualitative data production and community visioning process. Did great harm to an Olmsted Park right in front of one of my houses in Boston. Let me just say, in Boston, pound for pound, I've created as much affordable housing as this state or city. Pound for pound, I'm just one person. In the years since I bought 5 triple-deckers, anticipating gentrification, and using those to now have created 7 under 40-year-old black and brown homeowners within 500 feet of where I live in Boston. And one of the lots that Tiffany is talking about, which is on that list to be given away to developers, that same month won the Mayor's Award for the best community garden in the city of Boston. So which is it? So my point is, I'm glad to hear about stealing ideas. I haven't heard much about stealing them from community as opposed to professionals, government agencies, the development community. But Boston is on fire right now. And what's happening in Boston really is the first thing I've ever seen that could bring intergenerational working class people from all of these ethnic enclaves who have always been at one another's throats at the mayor and the cities. Would you care to comment?
Just want to say thank you, Derek, for your continued advocacy. We know how deep your roots run here in Boston, and now I'm learning in Pensacola. So thank you.
Can I just say real quick on stealing ideas from community? And you know, I'm being flippant when I use the term stealing, but I do think one of the things that the design professions and maybe design education does a better job than most professions is at helping to design processes for true listening. Not always executed perfectly. And, you know, we're very self-critical as a profession about, you know, designers, about how we should improve upon community engagement process. But, you know, I spend a lot of time these days with people with education in law. I spend a lot of time with people with an education in finance. And there's a lot to be learned from the design professions and from design education systems in community engagement process. And listening is critical. Not stealing ideas necessarily, but it does.
Actually, that's what I mean.
I know what you mean. Listening.
Roxbury doesn't need a $200 million professional women's sports team in a
Ooh, that's a big topic. Let's see if we can get in. Thank you so much for your comments and your time. We're glad to hear. Do folks have questions? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Xixuan. I'm actually coming from the Kennedy School and Business School, so it's my first time to experience this, and thank you so much. And my question actually for all 3 of you, Jacob, I think you can become a good designer like after graduate. And Tiffany, when I read your CV, I feel like it's like very typical, you know, very successful entrepreneur and business story. And for Mayor DC Rivers, I think as you mentioned, you can become a very good like developer or like real estate investor after this. So like put my Kennedy's hat, what made you to decide to like take into the public sector after you achieve like some sort of personal success, and what will be the sacrifice like stepping in this field, like giving up like everything you've achieved in the past? Thank you so much.
Well, really, truly, the reason I ran was I want to say mayor, as this mayor / previous mayor said, is no better honor than being the mayor of where you grew up. And where you grew up, where my daughter who's 10 right there is going to grow up. And I know that sounds like what you hear in like a political commercial, but like at our level, that really is why. It isn't for the money, and it isn't for the emails I get about parking. If you guys are up to $1 an hour in Boston, that caused a lot of fervor down in Pensacola, going from 50 cents to $1 in parking, but $1 an hour. But I do it because I love the community, and I know that we went to strong mayor format about 15 years ago, and the direction and the trajectory of the community is completely dependent on, in the strong mayor format, you're the CEO, you're the operator, you have a council that votes on budget and on ordinances, that's it. So when you have that format, if you have a really good mayor that wants to push things forward, lots of things get done, and if you don't, it could be really detrimental. So I don't really, I've got nothing on my mind right now other than a few more years doing this, and then life has served me well. I was covering football for a living. I was a chief of staff. I owned a brewery, sold it, and became the mayor. So I did the opposite of what most mayors do. I didn't major in political science, but I love it, and I'm doing it because I love my community.
I'll just note that there's an interview I gave many years ago where I found a writing that I did when I was 7 years old, and I didn't remember this until I read the interview actually. But apparently, when I was 7, I said I was going to be the mayor of Salisbury, and so I manifested it. Right? You got to manifest these things. The reality is, it was 2005. I was on the American Institute of Architects Board of Directors as the national student director, and I was having dinner sitting next to the public director, who was the mayor of Honolulu, Jeremy Harris. And the two of us were having a conversation about where my career was going to head. I was 22 years old. I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I wanted to be a famous architect, and that didn't pan out. And he said, "You need to go home." I had grand visions about what I was going to accomplish, and he said, "You need to go home." And I eventually went home. I did some other things in between, but eventually went home and got involved housing board, planning commission, and before you know it, found my skills applied to the city council and later mayor. So I would just say public leadership is something that people find in their blood, but anybody can do it. When you care about your community, no matter what you've done with yourself, no matter what you went to school for, public leadership, I think, is something we need more people to be called to fight for their communities, fight for the places where they grew up and where they're raising their kids. And so I would encourage more people to consider it as an option, a phase of life at least. Because it's also the worst financial decision I ever made. But I don't care. I love it.
Yeah, I would just add to that and say, I think of all the jobs I've had, including CEO, this has been the most rewarding. Every 20 to 30 minute chunk of my day is something that's truly impactful. And if I make the wrong decision, it impacts people negatively. If I make the right decision, it impacts people well. And it's just incredibly rewarding.
Let's take one more question. I believe, is there one over here? Coleman, welcome.
Hey, my name is Coleman, last name Jordan. I'm actually coming from Baltimore, teaching at Morgan State University in the architecture program there, and I'm here as a HBCU fellow, or visiting professor is my title. But my question is related to, I am a member and have been on the board of the Baltimore Rotterdam Sister Cities program, and you talked about theft and stealing ideas. One of the things that we take students over to Rotterdam every year, every spring break, and we do these comparatives on housing. And what was mentioned earlier, sort of the, I would say, race placing as well as homeless placement. There's always a sort of context in the U.S. where, where do we move these folks? Where do we move these folks? It's like that. But the conversations that we hear in Rotterdam is very different. There's not this kind of a collective identity of how do we, move people here and there. It is really a conversation about housing, in the sense of how do we build the house people versus sort of identities. So I'm just wondering if your theft or your stealing happens globally in this context. And also, I'm curious if you've met colleague, Christina Murphy, or any of the Morgan faculty, Samia Kirchner, that have been working on these issues. That's my question to.
So great to see a fellow Baltimorean or a fellow Marylander here. Yeah, so Morgan is a great partner. Morgan was a great partner when I was mayor of Salisbury too. We, as I mentioned, had studios that helped us with a couple of projects in our city, and we funded a studio this past fall at Morgan. So it's something that we're trying to engage more in, that partnership. But yes, we're looking at global models. I mean, we've had lots of conversations recently about social housing in a variety of countries in Europe as maybe a model for us. What we're really focused on with respect to housing in Baltimore right now is we've stepped in a big way, and there's a lot of risk politically in that, but we've stepped in a big way around vacancy in Baltimore. There are just under 13,000 VBNs, or vacant building notices, in Baltimore City. Those are properties that we are with absolute certainty are vacant, abandoned. They're going to be title issues, liens, code enforcement issues, water bills unpaid, all of the above, messy problems, often deteriorating, collapsing, et cetera. So the state has engaged by creating, the governor created the Reinvest Baltimore project and the Baltimore Vacant Reinvestment Council, which is state-led. So I sit as the chair. It involves philanthropy, community, the faith community. So we've got a variety of faith institutions engaged, and the city government as well. And so we're directly engaged in trying to address housing challenges in Baltimore without prescribed. We're going to ensure that we build lots of LIHTC projects throughout the city, or instead of being prescriptive, we're being process and system focused with the accompanying $77 million a year to help. So capital was necessary. We weren't operating at scale. There were lots of great ideas, but we had no scale. So we're now bringing $27 million in development money and $50 million in demolition, stabilization, and acquisition money a year to scale up the effort. And that's our accompanying tool to leverage, get private and philanthropy interests involved, and also to try to create a big impact. So I'd love to talk to you more about it, but we're super engaged. I'd love to know what Rotterdam's doing, because I don't. So maybe we can talk offline.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Before we end tonight, and I'll pass it back to Toni, let's have one last word from each of you. We've got a lot of design students here, especially, looking forward to their career. It's tricky times out there. What kind of advice can you give these students about seeking?
I think I'd be asking questions. I want to ask you guys what's going on. What I will touch on one quick thing that was talked about here. Whenever I was a journalist, the thing that helped me the most be successful in that field was calling on people when they didn't need something. My advice to folks that are going to be in your industry is to lean on your community partners, your council members, get involved in the community, because when we have a big problem, everybody comes with their ideas. And like we all as humans say, well, we approach these newfound ideas with skepticism, right? What's the goal here? What's the ulterior motive? I think as you guys go out into the world and be super successful, whatever communities that you end up in, being engaged in your community and within the design community, not when there's controversy in the newspaper, but when every single day you could truly have an impact on your city. I know if you were in Pensacola, you could do that. So that would be my advice. It doesn't mean you have to run for office. You don't have to be as crazy as us. But a little crazy to go invest a little bit of your time in making the community that you live in a little bit better. If you guys could do that, you could really shape the place of which you live.
I would say the biggest lesson I've learned now sitting in the public sector seat is how disagreement can actually make a project stronger. And I want to give a big shout out to Derek Evans, who I know well. We shared an elevator ride very recently where we also had, I think, a very, full-throated disagreement. But I think it comes from a place of caring so deeply, caring so loudly, and, in some cases, not having trust in government from all the many many years and decades of disinvestment and mistakes made in the past. So I have seen firsthand, just even in the last 3 years, and we know projects go much longer than 3 years, how disagreeing voices in the community may initially feel like, oh, we might not actually be getting anywhere, we're just locked. But I think moving beyond that and using design as a tool, as a potential solution for creating more consensus and a better project can really be something strong that can be centering community.
Tiffany, that is music to Professor Diane Davis's ear.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Beautiful. Jake?
I'm going to be quick, but I do have two thoughts. So number one is I'm going to build on both of them. The mayor mentioned earlier messaging and language. I think one of the great fights that we need the most talented minds in America to work on over the coming years is how we reframe the supply shortage that we have, how we reframe its connection to affordability, and how we reframe housing and its impact on neighborhoods and communities, both real and perceived. And we have not found it yet. I have not found anybody who is successfully talking about it in a way that is universally changing minds. And I failed to mention earlier, or one of the things I don't talk about much in these rooms is my other job is as a cognitive warfare officer in the Army, and in informing people and influencing outcomes and influencing behaviors is the fight. We've heard terms like hearts and minds, but it's really about recognizing that you have to get people to want to pursue the very thing that you are after, or else you're going to lose. If you don't change minds, it's over. And so we need the bright people in the world to start thinking about, we know what needs to happen. We got to convince people that it's what needs to happen. And the second, just Tiffany, building on what you're saying, is, look, we're in maybe one of the most turbulent times in American history in the last few weeks. And it is going to be natural that there are going to be parts of this country, including people in powerful positions, that are going to abandon the way we talk about things. They're going to abandon also the things that we have been trying to do. And so what I would say is that as many of us as possible have to be as committed to justice, particularly racial justice, as we were 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. There are going to be people in government who are going to shy away from talking about the things that we were talking about a month ago. And so for those of you who are in these fights, don't abandon your cause. Don't abandon the way you talk about these things. Stay committed. Stay in this fight for the next 4 years, and of course, for the next 40 and beyond.
Beautiful. Join me in giving them a big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. Toni, I'll turn it back to you.
I don't know if I can top that, but I'm going to just offer a quick final comments. One is, I do want students to be crazy enough to do these jobs. And those of you who have taken my class or been a research assistant for me and know the trajectory of my own career and practice, I intentionally, as a designer, wanted to put my skills and expertise in the rooms of decision making, because being a consultant only gets you so far in decision making. And so we have expertise, the way we think, how we solve problems, that can make us useful leaders across so many sectors. And the public sector is one of those spaces. Your career is going to be long and wonderful. And I didn't imagine doing this type of work when I was in your shoes, but this sector needs us to be a part of that table. So I would like you to be as crazy to think about being a mayor or a chief of staff or a planning director or a head of economic development and all of those things. So that's one. Two, Professor Gerald Caton famously says to plan is human and to implement is divine. And I sit here just sort of thinking about the arc of my career. I've been an architect and have had the great fortune to see, I worked for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, and I've had the great fortune to see the plans that we worked on actually get built, and I can walk through the building that I was a part of designing. As a planning director, deputy planning director in Washington, D.C., working with Toni Williams, spent about 7 years there, did plans all across the city at all different scales, walk through DC today and see those plans implemented. Now, that gives me great joy, and I understand the role that I played in that, and I also really question the role I played in that, because that city is vastly different from when I planned it, and people who I planned with actively, some of them are no longer there. So I have very mixed feelings about it, and it's why I started the Just City Lab, to question whether design can have really meaningful impacts in social and spatial justice. And it was a question and a proposition which I think I will probably continue to answer, and there won't be a definitive answer for, perhaps in my lifetime. It is an ongoing fight, because sometimes you get thrown back several steps, and you gotta make up ground to keep going. So all these issues that we're talking about are gonna be omnipresent in your career, just as they are in ours. But I sit here with such amazing gratitude, because the work of the lab was about testing that, determining if I was within a community that wanted to figure that out, putting out propositions more like a call to action. And so to sit here and hear these folks who've gone through this program we created, producing real outcomes, this is what allyship looks like. This is what the fight looks like. This is what commitment looks like. So we have built a movement. There has been a response to our call to action. And so I sit here with such amazing gratitude for all of you, those who are coming in, those who have joined us in partnership, Trinity, the Mayor's Institute on City Design, U.S. Conference of Mayors, my team, and the GSD for allowing me to do this. I want to thank you all for being here this evening. GSD doesn't get packed houses on public programs anymore. Everybody looks at it online. So thank you, students, so much for your interest in being in the room. Look forward to seeing you for Volume 6 next year. Thank our panelists and our fabulous moderator again. Have a wonderful evening. And we are done.